Hey, everybody. Welcome. Glad to be here with you tonight. We're going to have kind of overdue conversation tonight, but that's good because the topic is important. So, yeah, let's do it.
Spoken of the American century. I say that the century on which we are entering can be and must be the century of the common man.
A radical redistribution of economic power.
I mean, we know that racism is just a byproduct of capitalism. Everything would be all right if everything was put back in the hands of the people.
We need a government that will make sure Americans are taken care of and organize the economy to serve the people, not the profits of a wealthy few.
We now have the techniques and the resources to get rid of poverty.
We got to start getting out there with the people.
Get out of the movement and get to the masses.
We need a government of action.
Welcome, everybody. I am so glad to be here with all of you tonight. We are going to have yet another late night conversation. And we're going to follow our usual format. First, I'll give my opening remarks about the topic that you see below. Then from there, we will do the roll call. I will call you all out as I see you, names and locations. And then I'll answer any questions that you have in the second half of the show. Now, the way the questions can be sent is via Rumble Rants on the Rumble or to Caleb Maupin 22 on Cash App. People did ask some very good questions last night. We'll do it again and I'll answer some more questions. So that's the way the cookie crumbles. That's the way we do things. The only announcement is to join the Center for Political Innovation because we're doing some really, really exciting stuff. I will be getting into that some in my remarks. So send your questions for the second half of the show. Rumble Rants on the Rumble, Cash App, Caleb Maupin 22. As always, first opening remarks, then the roll call, and then I answer your questions. Friends, I have put off having this conversation with all of you for a while because I wanted to wait. I wanted to wait and see exactly what happened. And honestly, I'm still not sure exactly how things are going to play out. But I have waited long enough. And this topic is so important and related to everything that we talk about on here. And it's just got to be addressed. And we just have to talk about it. Tulsi Gabbard, the director of national intelligence, she released documents earlier this month that showed that Russiagate, the allegation somehow Russia was meddling in the U.S. election in 2016 to try and secure the victory of Donald Trump, that was not true, and that the intelligence agencies, Barack Obama, Hillary Clinton, they all knew it wasn't true, and they said it and promoted it anyway. Now, this is big. And in the Trump universe, it's big. And it should be much bigger. Mainstream media is downplaying it. In the Trump universe, they're highlighting it. It's very, very big. What the documents show is that during the 2016 elections, Barack Obama assembled all the intelligence agencies that are unified around the Office of the Director of National Intelligence. He assembled them and asked them to assess whether Russia was interfering in the U.S. election, trying to secure the victory of one candidate or another. And they came back and they said, no, Russia doesn't want one candidate or another to win. Then after the election, Barack Obama assembled the intelligence agencies, and once again, they did an investigation. And once again, they came back and said, no, Russia is not trying to interfere in the elections. And in fact, according to what has been published, Russia expected that Hillary Clinton would win the election. And they were planning to respond by, revealing some of her corruption. This is what the documents say. I'm not saying this is necessarily true. I'm just telling you this is what the documents say, is that according to what's been released, not only was Russia not trying to interfere in the elections to make sure that Donald Trump won, on top of that, they were expecting that Donald Trump would lose. And then the hope was that after the election, they alleged that Russia was going to reveal even more about Hillary Clinton's corruption. And, I don't know if that's true or not, but it would be Russia defending itself. The Russian government is constantly accused of being a corrupt regime, of being, all of this. So by pointing out Hillary Clinton and some backroom deals that she made and all that after the election, they would be defending themselves, right? The allegation, the narrative in U.S. media is that the USA, where big corporations and banks have all the money, where the Democratic primary was rigged to make sure Bernie Sanders couldn't be the nominee, even though most Democrats wanted that. Where big mainstream media decides who gets to be treated as a candidate. The USA is pure democracy. And in Russia, where they have elections that are internationally monitored with international observers, where the ballots are counted, where all of the voting places are monitored 24/7, where they have a whole weekend to vote, where every region gets to vote in Russia, mind you. In America, people living in Guam, people living in Puerto Rico, people living in American Samoa have no vote. But in Russia, every region gets to vote. They have a whole weekend and a national holiday to vote. Every polling place is monitored by security cameras that can be watched from the elections national center. International observers are there. The Russian elections, we're told, are not legitimate. We're told that Russia is somehow a brutal dictatorship and a corrupt regime. And America, we're told, we have this corrupt electoral college. They have this electoral college system where the majority vote, the majority will is not even selected. Where on top of that, a number of regions don't get to vote because they don't have full statehood, like Puerto Rico and Guam and American Samoa. There are all kinds of ways in which the U.S. election is nowhere near as democratic as the Russian election is. But we're told in America that America is a free, open, democratic society, and Russia is a corrupt regime. So the allegation, I don't know if it's true or not, is that not only did Russia not interfere to help Donald Trump win, they predicted, which mainstream media predicted, I predicted, everyone predicted that Hillary Clinton would win that election. And then afterwards, they were going to reveal some information they had about Hillary Clinton's corruption to defend themselves, to make the point that, America is a corrupt country and, you accuse us, well, look at yourself in the mirror, that is what these documents say. And that before the election, the intelligence community said Russia is not interfering. After the election, the intelligence community said Russia is not interfering. And then Barack Hussein Obama came forward and said, well, I want a different answer. And Russiagate was something that the intelligence community said wasn't real from the beginning, and their arms were twisted. So now today, we have documents that have been released by the Senate Judiciary Committee that take it even further, that reveal that the idea that Trump interfered, or that Russia supposedly interfered in the U.S. elections in order to secure the victory of Donald Trump, where did it come from? It came from Hillary Clinton. It came from the Clinton campaign. It wasn't even something that Barack Obama thought up himself. It wasn't a lie that Obama made up. It was something that the Clinton campaign made up. And they got the FBI to go along with it. They got all kinds of intelligence agencies to go along with it. Now, as Kinkle is pointing out in the chat, you and I already knew that, right? We knew the idea there was some big Russian conspiracy to elect Donald Trump. That's bullshit. We knew that. We knew that the idea we should be terrified of Russia, Russia's big, mean, scary Russia interfering in our elections. Trump is a Putin puppet. We knew that was bullshit. And part of the reason we knew that is because of the way Trump governed. Trump was not a friend of Russia in his first term. Trump sent lethal weapons to Ukraine. Trump ripped up nuclear agreements. And so the arms race escalated. Trump did not lift sanctions that were put on Russia by the Biden administration or by the Obama administration. Under Trump, RT, the TV network from Russia, was forced to register as a foreign agent. All kinds of anti-Russian stuff happened under the Trump administration. The idea that Trump was somehow being a friend of Russia was not true. Trump really, in his first term in office, did very little that Russia might have liked. Maybe Russia would have liked Donald Trump going and meeting with Kim Jong-un, but maybe not, right? It seems like now North Korea is very close to Russia and, is rebuffing Trump's offers to talk. And, maybe, Trump's efforts, kind of slowed down that process. Now North Korea and Russia are closer than ever. And it may have been that the negotiations with the United States kind of got in the way of that relationship getting better. Maybe so. It may not be that Russia even liked that, right? I'm really not seeing any way in which Trump's first term was a pro-Russia, presidency. He bombed Syria. Barack Obama stopped short of bombing Syria, but Donald Trump bombed Syria in response to chemical weapons allegations that were fake. Donald Trump destabilized and tried to overthrow Venezuela. Donald Trump did a lot of things in his first term that were not pro-Russian, but it didn't matter. And I guess the important thing about the Russiagate hoax and the Russiagate lie was it psychologically destroyed the American left. Any sense of anti-imperialism, any sense of opposition to the U.S. establishment that existed within the American left was eradicated because of Russiagate. The narrative was that Putin, the leader of an anti-imperialist country, the leader of a country aligned with China, the leader of a country that was aligned with North Korea and Cuba and Vietnam and Iran, etc., that Putin, the leader of a country that is an essential ally of all the anti-imperialist countries, is the reason Trump won the election. That's what the narrative was. And based on that, everything we don't like about Donald Trump is Putin's fault. Donald Trump is a fascist, which he's not a fascist. Donald Trump's not a fascist. But the narrative was that Donald Trump is a white supremacist. Donald Trump is a fascist. And so therefore, Putin is a fascist. And then from there, the narrative became that all the countries that are aligned with Putin are also fascist. And the left became completely pro-imperialist. The notion that to be a leftist means that you are less hostile to countries that the USA wants to bomb evaporated completely. It had already started to fade under Obama's administration when they framed the intervention in Libya as being some kind of righteous revolution from below, when they framed the war in Syria as being, a people's revolution. It became a trendy cause to want to bomb Syria and send weapons to Syria. But the final nail in the coffin for the American left was Russiagate. And at that point, to be a leftist in America, to be a socialist, a communist, to be an anti-racist, to be somebody who is a feminist, to be anything associated with leftism in America has come to mean being a supporter of U.S. imperialism. And yes, there are outliers on the internet, and there's like one tiny little sect called the Party for Socialism and Liberation that keeps one foot in the American left and mouths anti-imperialist talking points. But other than that, other than people on the internet and PSL, to be a leftist in America means that you are pro-imperialism. It means that you are in line with regime change wars, that you are a neoconservative. The neoconservatives are notorious for their notion that it is the duty of the United States to, quote, spread freedom around the world, right? The neocons were actually criticized by Brzezinski. Zbigniew Brzezinski was an advisor to Jimmy Carter, and he opposed the axis of evil speech by Bush because he said that's not strategic. If you frame up our relationships with governments in a moral way rather than a strategic one, we can't negotiate and make alliances where we need to. That the neocons believe that it is the duty of the American government to spread freedom around the world. That is the neocon belief. And Brzezinski and the Cold War soft power crowd and a lot of the U.S. foreign policy apparatus isn't that stupid. But neocons, the faction that goes back to Irving Kristol, who was the founder of the CIA's Congress for Cultural Freedom program that reinvented leftist thought, and then he broke with the New Left because he supported the Vietnam War, and he was an admirer of Richard Nixon. Leo Strauss, the academic who fled Nazi Germany and moved to the United States and was the mentor of many people who went on to serve in the Reagan administration and others. Their understanding of the world is that it is the job of the United States to spread freedom all over the world, that communism and fascism are the same thing, that anti-imperialist governments are the equivalent of Nazi Germany, and that anti-imperialism, socialism, communism, and Nazi fascism are all the same, and they're all when the masses of people get together. They're when the inferior rabble of people get together and start threatening the freedom of the intellectuals. And their belief is that it is the duty of intellectuals to get a hold of the American government and set up mechanisms through which the masses of people can be controlled so the intellectuals are safe, and then use the American government to spread freedom around the world, and protect the intellectuals. They believe that freedom is the right of the philosopher kings in the Platonic sense to rule over the rest of us, and that most people are too stupid to allow that to happen. Stupid people will get in the way. The masses of people will get in the way of the great philosopher kings ruling over us. So you need to set up a system where the masses are never able to get together and threaten the freedom of the natural superiors, of the overlords. That is what neoconservatism is. And people started talking about it during the Bush years because Bush was surrounded by these people. And now it's just an important part of U.S. discourse. And there's a lot of confusion about what a neocon actually is. There's some people who think neocons are anyone who wants war with Russia or anyone who advocates regime change wars. No, neoconservatism refers to a philosophical movement associated with Leo Strauss and Irving Kristol. And it is specifically a foreign policy perspective and a philosophical perspective that was cultivated by Leo Strauss, cultivated by Irving Kristol, and promoted among those who were studying Sovietology, which was a field of U.S. academic discourse, people who studied the Soviet Union, studied communism in the 70s, and developed a particular interpretation of communism as being the equivalent of Nazi Germany and being, the collectivist drive against the great individual. And that's the neocon perspective. And the neoconservative perspective was something leftists generally opposed, right? Leftists generally had a notion of beyond good and evil. And especially during the Cold War, it was leftists who said, let's negotiate with the Soviet Union. The Soviet Union has some good aspects. We have some good aspects as well. There's truth on both sides, etc. Neoconservatism was the notion that the West is so great. The West is so great, and it is the best system ever because we make sure that there is not collectivism. We make sure that there is not, government control over the economy. We make sure that there is not loyalty to the community, nationalism, etc. That's what neoconservatism is, and that is now synonymous with leftism. Leftism in America is at this point the belief that any mass populist movement is fascist, right? That Putin and Xi Jinping and Iran and Venezuela are all the equivalent of Hitler because they don't allow the free market, right? And now you are not allowed to be a genuine socialist even on the left. You can't advocate the banks, factories, and industries being owned by the masses of people and organized to serve public good. because that makes you Hitler. And you definitely cannot support any of these governments. And that Russiagate was what really just made leftism at this point pro-imperialist. Rachel Maddow, who is the liberal host on MSNBC, she is the most blatant expression of this. And now that we know that Russiagate was all a lie, it was all just a complete bullshit lie, I want to show you a segment from Rachel Maddow's show, because she fixated on Russiagate excessively, more than anybody. And this is a segment where she's interviewing Andrew Yang, the presidential candidate, the Chinese American tech guy who was running for president. She interviews Andrew Yang, and in this interview, the amount of Russiagate fixation and how stupid it made people seem really comes across. And I wanted to just go through this Rachel Maddow segment for you really quickly. Keep in mind, we now know Barack Obama knew Russia didn't interfere in the elections to help Trump. We now know that Hillary Clinton knew that. We now know the intelligence agencies did multiple assessments and came to the conclusion Russia was not interfering to help Trump. We know that behind the scenes, they knew it wasn't true. And this was the tone of American discourse.
We have to let Russia know, look, we get it. We've tampered with other elections. You've tampered with our elections, and now it has to stop. And if it does not stop, we will take this as an act of hostility against the American people. I believe most Americans would support me on this.
I want to
Except they didn't. And Barack Obama knew that, and Hillary Clinton knew that.
respond to Mr. Yang. I don't see a moral equivalency between our country and Russia. Vladimir Putin is someone who has shot down planes over Ukraine, who has poisoned his opponents, and we have not talked about what we need to.
Neither of those things are true, mind you, right? They've never proven that that plane was shot down by Russia, and they've never proven that that poison,
do to protect ourselves from Russia invading our election.
So not only is it a fact, keep in mind, this is Amy Klobuchar. She's saying not only is it a fact that Russia interfered in the election, which we now know is not the case, but Russia's interference that didn't happen in the U.S. election is far worse than anything that the United States has ever done around the world, right? Overthrowing the government of Indonesia in 1965, 500,000 people killed, rounded up, it turns into an ethnic genocide of ethnic Chinese people, directed by the CIA. No, that's fine. Coup in Chile, the Chilean government is toppled in 1973. They round up 20,000 people in a sports stadium. The CIA gives lists of communists. They round them up in a sports stadium and start slaughtering them and torturing them to death. No. Russia allegedly buying some memes or revealing some emails, which we now know never happened, is somehow the far worse. I mean, this
wasn't meddling. That's what I do when I call my daughter on a Saturday night and ask her what she's doing. Sorry. This was much more serious than that. This was actually invading our elections.
It was much more serious, invading our elections. How did they invade our elections? Not a single vote was changed. I mean, the whole thing we now know was a fucking lie, right? But they're one-upping each other and how much they believe something that at least Hillary Clinton and Barack Obama, who they're all friends with, know wasn't true.
We're back with Democratic presidential candidate Andrew Yang. I wanted to ask you about that interaction, because you said your piece there in terms of Russia and the potential interference in our election in 2020 and pushing back against them. Senator Klobuchar essentially accusing you of making a moral equivalence between us and Russia from when you said we've tampered with other elections. How do you respond to what she said there?
I didn't respond to the night of because I think most Americans realize I was just making a point that we know America has historically interfered in other countries' elections, at least in our past.
Like what?
Like what?
Well, there have been a number of, and I don't want to go through the
Do you have like a specific one that's in mind? That's a one that bugs you?
Yeah. Can you believe this? Like, this woman's a Rhodes Scholar. This woman went to Oxford, but she thinks that America has never interfered in another country's elections.
There are a couple let's say in our hemisphere that I think are relatively well documented historical examples. But I think most Americans realize that we do need to defend our elections against Russian interference, and that has to be the focus and the mission. And that acknowledging that America's done things in the past has nothing to do with that.
Mm-hmm. In terms of...
Yeah, now, I mean, she just played stupid there. Rachel Maddow before millions of people on national television made it sound as if the USA never overthrew Mossadegh in Iran in 1953, as if the USA never overthrew Jacobo Arbenz in Guatemala, as if the United States didn't back various military juntas throughout Latin America, as if the United States didn't support Syngman Rhee becoming the military dictator of South Korea, didn't support Park Chung-hee becoming the military dictator of South Korea and toppling the elected government. The examples of the USA not only interfering in countries' elections, but in some cases supporting the military of a country in overthrowing an elected government because that elected government wanted to do business with Russia or wanted to move towards socialism. The examples of that are so numerous. Indonesia, not only in 1965, the USA violently overthrew the government of Indonesia. The USA installed a military dictatorship in Indonesia, and then that government in Indonesia committed a genocide in East Timor. Right? I mean, there's just so many examples of the USA destabilizing. I mean, in Italy, they were going to elect the Communist Party after World War II, and they were going to leave NATO, and they launched decades of programs, Operation Gladio, where they interfered in election after election after election after election. But Rachel Maddow, not only does she take it as fact that Russia supposedly interfered in the U.S. elections, which we now know was all a big fat lie, on top of that, now to be a leftist means that you are a Bush supporter, basically a Bush supporter during the Obama administration or during the Bush years. I remember when I first got political during the Bush years, the argument for why the U.S. had to invade Iraq was because we just care about those people so much. They're all being oppressed by evil Saddam Hussein. And the USA is a land of freedom. And I say that's not true. There's many dictatorships backed by the United States. There's been many times we've overthrown democracies to back dictators. And the Bush supporters say, where? We never did that. In World War II, we fought against Hitler. He was a dictator. We were for democracy. In the Vietnam War and the Korean War, we were fighting against communists for democracy. Where has the USA ever supported a dictatorship? That's what it means to be a leftist right now. That is the level of leftist discourse. That is what being a socialist or a communist in America means. And I mean, that is how bad it has gotten. That is what, I mean, Russiagate was the end of anything left of the peace movement of the 1960s, the anti-Vietnam War movement, of the Nicaragua solidarity movement of the 80s. In the 80s, the USA said the Sandinistas of Nicaragua are a brutal dictatorship, and so it was Catholics and Dennis Kucinich and all kinds of leftists who went out and said we got to stop funding the Contras of Nicaragua because they're killing priests and nuns, and it's all over, right? It's all over. It's all over. Leftism in America is pro-imperialism. And that is the ultimate result of Russiagate, right? And that's not going away anytime soon, right? And I mean, it's at the point where a neoconservative understanding of geopolitics and, politics in general, political systems, is what it means to be a leftist. Leftists now believe that if you want a system where this means of production are centrally owned and controlled, you are a Nazi. Leftists now tell me that socialism and communism just means that there's a bunch of voluntary worker cooperatives, that are voluntarily set up where people share their profits, right? I mean, it is really, 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 you have to acknowledge this, that Russiagate destroyed any notion that being a leftist means you're anti-war, etc. And if that's one thing, the fact that Rachel Maddow on national television said, where has the USA ever interfered in an election? that right there tells you that there is no anti-war left. There is no anti-war left. And at this point, the only substantial opposition to war is coming from the right, right? When Trump bombed Iran recently, and we're going to get to a lot. There's a lot we need to talk about tonight. I'm just going to go down the line because there's a lot to go over tonight. But when Trump recently bombed Iran, who came out swinging against it? Thomas Massie and Marjorie Taylor Greene. And who barely came along. Finally, there was some opposition to it from AOC and from Bernie, and it was lame opposition. AOC voted for Israel's Iron Dome. Marjorie Taylor Greene voted against it, and so did Thomas Massie. And yeah, you can say, well, there's PSL. Okay, yeah, there's this little tiny group that has an office in Manhattan. But at the end of the day, the left is pro-imperialist. And even though Trump has been a huge disappointment, and trust me, and we're going to get to that later. We're going to talk about Trump. This is why I've been waiting to have this conversation. I wanted to collect my thoughts, and I wanted to clarify a few things and tell you where we are. But even though Trump has been abominable, the only force of non-interventionism is coming from the right. It's coming from libertarians like Thomas Massie. It's coming from hard MAGA Republicans. It's coming from, conservative voices like Candace Owens, Nick Fuentes. Pains me to say that. Nick Fuentes, I find to be really obnoxious. Candace Owens, I find to be a bit more tolerable. But Nick Fuentes just really grinds my gears and doesn't sit right with me. But you have to admit that. Anti-war leftism, anti-war sentiments from the left don't exist. They exist maybe on Twitter. They exist in somebody's mind. They exist at a coffee shop, but they're non-existent. And even the leftists who support Palestine still want regime change in Iran. The leader of the pro-Palestine movement, who was, threatened with deportation by Trump, Mahmoud Khalil, was a regime change activist who was key in bringing down the Syrian Arab Republic and working against Assad. You have to acknowledge this, that if you are still operating on the assumption that the Republicans are the main danger, that Democrats are slightly better in any way than Republicans, if you are operating on that assumption, you are on the pro-war side. That being a Democrat in our time is the equivalent of being a Republican during the Bush years. Now, during the Bush years, the Democrats went along with everything Bush did. But you had Democrats like Dennis Kucinich and others who spoke against it. But the Democrats largely enabled. If it wasn't for Nancy Pelosi, if it wasn't for all kinds of Democrats, the USA never would have invaded Iraq. Hillary Clinton was a big supporter of the invasion of Iraq. The Democrats went along with it, but there were voices in the Democrat camp that opposed the war in Iraq. And the Republican camp during the Bush years was solid in its support, except for like Ron Paul, which no one knew anything about Ron Paul back then. He was an obscure figure. Well, now, fast forward to the time we live in now the Democrats are the new Republicans. The Democrats are the new Republicans. And the Democrat Party, there is no real opposition within it. And the only levels of opposition that we see are coming from the fringe of MAGA that is opposing President Trump. Now, why is it, and this is what I wanted to get at, this is the next big point I wanted to make, why did Barack Obama and Hillary Clinton accuse Russia of meddling in the elections and come out with the narrative that Trump was an agent of Putin, was loyal to Putin, had won because of Putin? Why? Why did this happen? Why? I mean, it obviously didn't happen because it was true, and they knew it wasn't true. So why did they say this? Because the right wing in America doesn't play by the rules. And for better or for worse, and usually for worse, the right wing fights dirty and they don't play by the rules. There's a difference between Fox News and ABC and NBC and CNN. And that difference is why Fox News has the highest views. More people watch Fox News than watch CNN or MSNBC or CNN. Why do people watch Fox News? Because it's fun to watch. Fox News, Rupert Murdoch's TV channel in the United States that Roger Ailes was really the pioneer of. From the moment Fox News started, they wanted to make money. They wanted to make money. That's what they were about. And they wanted to have the top ratings so that they could make lots of money. And they did not care. Why has Fox News done more town halls with Bernie Sanders than CNN or MSNBC ever have? And that's true. They've done whole big long town halls where they just let Bernie Sanders talk the whole time. Why? They don't agree with him. They're a conservative TV network because people will watch it, because people will view it. They will make more money. That has always been the approach of what you might call conservatainment. Really going back to the 70s with the rise of neoconservatism in America, with the rise of the Nixon administration, there's been a layer of the right wing that doesn't play by the rules, right? And in a way, it's almost like, they don't want to play by the rules, and the establishment hates them because of that. On the other hand, they're not allowed. They're not privy to the information. And there's so many examples of this, but one great example, right, is when Rush Limbaugh died, I went back and watched some of Rush Limbaugh's old material. And there were a couple things that he got blatantly wrong. He got so wrong. And you have to laugh at him. One of them is Gorbachev, right? Rush Limbaugh, there are so many images of Rush Limbaugh in the late 80s going, "What's so special about Gorbachev? He's a communist dictator. He's a communist dictator. The Democrats all like him. They think there's something special about Gorbachev. What could possibly be special? He's a communist dictator." He never got the memo that Gorbachev was going to dismantle the Soviet Union, that the USA was boosting the reformist wing of Soviet politics, that there was a whole operation to bring down the Soviet Union. Rush never got the memo. Rush was just trying to make money, and he was pandering to conservatives. The Democrats are a bunch of communist traitors. That's what they are. They're a bunch of communist traitors. And no one ever took him aside and said, "Rush, we're trying to help Gorbachev so he'll bring down the Soviet Union. Will you just shut up?" No one ever told him that. And so he's just fighting dirty, right? The memo was sent out among all the mainstream outlets. We like Gorbachev, right? He's bringing important changes to the Soviet Union, right? That was how mainstream U.S. media talked about Gorbachev. He was a reformist. Rush never got the memo. The only memo Rush got was that if I call the Democrats a bunch of commies and traitors, why, people will watch my program and I'll be popular because the Democrats are no good. And he never got the memo that Gorbachev was going to bring down the Soviet Union. And he probably looked like a big doofus when the Soviet Union fell. And, but his audience probably didn't care. But when the Soviet Union fell, he hadn't gotten the memo. We're supposed to be cheering for Gorbachev because this is our operation to bring down the Soviet Union. Another thing that Rush got completely wrong was Nelson Mandela. All right, Nelson Mandela, the leader of the African National Congress that was funded by the Soviet Union. The USA saw that apartheid in South Africa was going to fall. They had a black majority. And the USA made deals with Nelson Mandela to make sure that when apartheid fell, there would not be a change in property relations. And the Soviet Union fell, and Nelson Mandela did not redistribute any property for the most part. South Africa is still owned majority by white people. There's some talk of land redistribution now, but it's very mild. And Nelson Mandela made a lot of deals. And towards the end, of the early 90s, late 80s, Nelson Mandela was supported by mainstream U.S. media. The USA had dubbed him a terrorist and accused the African National Congress of being terrorists. But when it became clear that Nelson Mandela was going to win and that the Soviet Union was on its way out, U.S. media pivoted toward, we've always loved Nelson Mandela. He's just like Dr. Martin Luther King. He's part of America, blah, 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 blah. And Rush never got the memo. And you can watch video of Rush Limbaugh. Nelson Mandela's a communist. There's nothing. He's just a Marxist. He wants to establish a Stalinist dictatorship in South Africa. That's what he's trying to do. And he never got the memo. Like, okay, we've co-opted Nelson Mandela. We've made deals with him. He never got the memo. And he's fighting dirty, right? The memo, the U.S. foreign policy establishment is now we like Nelson Mandela, but we don't emphasize his communist roots. He never got the memo. No one ever took Rush's side. And Rush, his job is to just criticize whatever Democrats are doing. Oh, Nelson Mandela's a communist. And he just never got the memo. And there's many examples of that with Fox News, right? They don't play by the rules. They want to make money. They just want to make money. They want the highest views. Rupert Murdoch is a media, billionaire media figure who's famous for playing sex games with his audience, right? Is that, he like messes with socially conservative men. They have beautiful anchors with lots of cleavage who are then, talking about how angry they are that there's pornography on the internet, or he plays sexual head games with socially conservative people. He's also uses his staple was using social conservatism as populism, right? Average people are socially conservative. They don't want their kids using drugs. They don't believe in LGBT, and that's what it means. It's part of the neocon formula. That's Rupert Murdoch. And Roger Ailes and Rupert Murdoch, they started a TV network in the late 90s, it didn't play by the rules. And that scares the American political establishment. And, during the late Cold War normal, the right was tolerable, but it was almost like an Abbott and Costello routine in American politics, right? Abbott and Costello. So I believe it's Abbott is the straight man and Costello is the buffoon, right? Right. And it's Bert and Ernie, right? Bert is the tall one and Ernie is the goofball. And the conservatives were the goofballs of America, and the Eastern establishment, the liberals, they were the straight man, right? And imagine they're at a party, right? And the Soviet Union comes over and says, "Well, America, you have a problem with racism. You say you're a democratic country, and look how you treat the black people." And the liberals, Eastern establishment says, yes, we have something to work on there, but Dr. Martin Luther King made great changes, and we're improving things, and we have the National Negro Scholarship Program, and we're working on it. And then, the conservative says, "What? Bert, blacks are inferior. They're just an inferior race. So who cares? It's their problem. They're all a bunch of criminals and drug dealers." And the Eastern establishment says, now, Ernie, we don't talk that way now. We're improving things on the matter of race, aren't we? Well, but why do we have to improve things, though? They're all criminals. We're going to lock them in jail. And it's like this Abbott and Costello routine where the liberals are the responsible older brother who's trying to give diplomatic answers and save face, and conservatives are the fat and chubby goofball who just says, what right-wing people and what pro-establishment people in America really think. And it's this kind of Abbott and Costello routine where it's almost like they're performing for a different audience. The liberals are performing for people who have grievances. They're performing for people around the world who might be critical of the United States. They're performing for the black community. They're performing for intellectuals and college professors, and they're giving diplomatic answers. We've heard your concern, and we're trying to work it out. And the conservative is performing for the military, for the local cops on the street, for, conservative property owners and small business owners. And he's just feeding their biases and their bigotry, right? The USA is waging a war in Vietnam. The liberals say, well, it is unfortunate and we hope we don't have to escalate, but, we are trying to stop the spread of totalitarianism. And the conservative says, "Oh, a bunch of commies in there. We're going to bomb them into the Stone Age. We're going to blow them up." And Ernie is performing for the military. He's performing for the cops. He's performing for the small business owners in suburbia. And Bert is performing for, people in America who might have questions about it, for people in America from marginalized communities, from people around the world that are questioning U.S. foreign policy. And it's this like good cop, bad cop routine. That's what, the late Cold War was kind of like. And so it made sense that you had Rush Limbaugh, like, Nelson Mandela is it made sense that they just talked out of their ass because that was their job. Conservatives' job was to just kind of talk out of their ass. And the liberals were the ones that were supposed to be respectable, right? And the liberals were the ones that were respectable and made deals and lied through their teeth. And the conservatives were talking out of their ass and waving their arms and being performative for, the hardcore of America. And they were doing it in a way that gave the liberals deniability. They could say, that's Ernie, he also thought Nelson Mandela was just another communist. He also thought, look, you remember how he hated Gorbachev, don't worry about him, and that there was a level of deniability, right? With the right, because they talked out of their ass, because they were so crass, because they were so rude, because they were blatantly racist in many cases. Rush Limbaugh, I guess he infamously said to one of his callers, a black man called into his show, and he said to him, quote, "Take the bone out of your nose," right? That's literally a quote from Rush Limbaugh, because they were so openly racist. The establishment of America could, had deniability, right? It could just kind of deny them. And it was like almost part of their role to just act a fool, right? To just act crazy and just say crazy things, and be as offensive as possible. And their audience didn't really take them seriously. And there were many instances where these conservatives, Rush Limbaugh and others, would actually say, this is entertainment. I'm playing a character. I don't really believe what I say. Right? And there's many documented instances, where they get sued for something they said. And they say, well, no one believes I really think that. I'm playing a character. And for legal reasons, they would say that many times. And they weren't necessarily lying either. Ann Coulter would say things. Ann Coulter became like the queen of this. But this was basically just what late Cold War conservatives were like. Ann Coulter, she said women shouldn't be able to vote. Now, does she really believe women shouldn't be able to vote? Probably not. But that's something that would piss off feminists. It was something that would piss off basically any decent human being. And so, when she comes on a show, she says, I don't think women should be able to vote. And the liberals go, oh my God, how can you say that? Yeah, I said it. Ooh, look at me. I said women shouldn't be able to vote. Oh, aren't you offended by that? Aren't you triggered? And it's like, it's not serious. There's an element of, this is what conservatainment is, right? And it's just kind of like, they're intentionally saying things that sound wild and crazy, because it's funny, because it offends people, and because it's fulfilling their role. They're supposed to be the stupid, the stupid younger brother. They're supposed to be Ernie, right? They're supposed to be Abbott. They're supposed to be, they're the dumb partner, right? They're not the straight man. The liberals are the straight man. They're the dumb partner who just says crazy things and is a buffoon, right? And that kind of worked during the late Cold War. It worked very well. It worked very, very, very well. During the 70s, 80s, even up into the 90s, even up into the Bush years, it worked very, very well. But then the U.S. economy crashed. And there started to be real divisions within the U.S. ruling class about what to do. And at that point, the right wing became dangerous because they didn't have to play by the rules. Now, this is where it gets weird, folks. This is where it gets weird. And this is where it gets very, 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 very weird. Okay? I think starting during the Obama administration, the right wing started saying true things that they weren't supposed to say. And that doesn't mean that what the right believes is correct. And often they extrapolated crazy things from those things. But right, the birther thing, Barack Obama, I assume that was just a stupid racist story. There's something going on there. We don't know what, right? Barack Obama was born in Hawaii, that is clear. But we have his certificate of live birth. He was born in Hawaii. There's a newspaper announcement. He was born in Hawaii, but we don't have his birth certificate. And there's something going on there. We don't know what it is. And it was pretty clear you weren't supposed to talk about it. Now, one theory I've heard is that Barack Obama, when he was living in Indonesia, he gave up his American citizenship. He became an Indonesian citizen, and they made a deal and they kind of, scrubbed that, right? That's possible. In your birth certificate, if you give up your American citizenship, they stamp your birth certificate. So that could possibly be what happened. But the birther thing, it was weird. And Barack Obama was born in Hawaii. There's no question about that. But something was going on there. That wasn't supposed to be brought up. That found its way into the news. And it was something that is not supposed to be brought up. Another thing, the FEMA camps, right? Again, FEMA, the Federal Emergency Management Agency, during the 1950s, they were given the authority by the U.S. government to detain up to 2 million people that were on a U.S. Department of Justice list of subversives. It's called the McCarran Internal Security Act of 1951. And it's a law that says if there's a state of emergency declared, the U.S. Department of Justice has a list of 2 million people who get put in prison camps. And they built the prison camps, and they had the list of 2 million people. And then the Supreme Court stepped in and said, no, you don't. You can't do this. But the camps were built, and they do exist. And then under the Bush administration, President Bush brought back indefinite detention. That was a big part of the Patriot Act. That was a big part of the Bush administration. He said that I can declare someone to be an enemy combatant and hold them without criminal charges. And the camps existed. Like the camps, the Federal Emergency Management Commission camps existed. And it was understood that if there was some kind of national emergency, the government could point at various people and say, you're all enemy combatants, and hold them without any criminal charges. And the right wing started talking about that and raising the alarm. They raised it in a crazy, stupid way. Barack Obama's a Muslim communist, and he's going to put all the gun owners in camps. But they started talking about it. You're not supposed to talk about that. But yes, there is, and that since 9/11, the McCarran Internal Security Act of 1951 said that if you're a communist and we declare a state of emergency, we can put you in this prison camp system that the U.S. government built. And then they got rid of it. And during the Bush administration, they passed a law that said the president has the right to declare people to be enemy combatants, and the Supreme Court upheld it. And Guantanamo Bay, you'll notice the people at Guantanamo Bay were never tried. They were never taken and formally charged with crimes in court and given a jury of their peers. They just sat in this prison camp that the U.S. government built in Guantanamo Bay without charges. That's not legal under the U.S. Constitution. Well, I guess it is now, right? And the right wing started talking about this. You're not supposed to talk about this. And the right wing started talking about true things that you weren't supposed to talk about, right? Raising whatever was going on with Barack Obama's birth certificate, raising what, the indefinite detention issue. Another thing, there were many examples of this where the right wing, because they fight dirty, because they are not part of the club, their beliefs may be awful and they may advocate awful policies, but they don't play by the rules, right? And they started raising issues. And in some cases, it was funny. In some cases, it was hilarious. It was funny. In other cases, it was weird. But, when Barack Obama bombed Libya, right? Alex Jones went to Libya, supported Libya. Ann Coulter wrote an article saying Obama cried, kids lied. Or Obama cried, kids died, all about how, it was a waste of America's time to go invade Libya. And the right wing demonstrated throughout the Obama presidency, most especially, that they would break the rules. Rush Limbaugh, I remember, supported the Lord's Resistance Army. Right? When the USA was sending more military forces to Africa, he hated, Rush Limbaugh hated Obama so much. He started talking about the Lord's Resistance Army, this terrorist group, Coney, that kidnaps people, all this stuff. And he started talking about them. He's like, Obama is a Muslim and he's sending He's sending the military to Africa to fight a group of Christians. Let me read you the manifesto of the Lord's Resistance Army. We want to teach the Bible. And he was like defending the Lord's Resistance Army as if they were a good group of people just because Obama was against them. And that the right wing, because they were not in power, they were at odds with the White House because they were at odds with the government. They started not following the standard script when it came to Libya, when it came to Syria, when it came to a lot of things. That tendency to just say whatever during the Cold War, and that not being concerned about the overall mission of American imperialism and just saying whatever will get them clicks and attention, made Trump less trustworthy to the American establishment. And Barack Obama and Hillary Clinton, they were able to convince a lot of people in the American deep state to go along with them and accuse Trump of working for Russia because there was a feeling that Trump might act in his own interest and say things that went against the interests of overall American imperialism for his own gain, that he wouldn't play by the rules, and that it would be much harder to control Donald Trump than it would be to control a regular politician. That was the fear. That doesn't make Trump good at all. And please don't misinterpret what I'm saying. They just detected that Trump, because he talked about the birther thing, because Trump talked about, talked about this, talked about that, because of all of that, because of WikiLeaks, because of Julian Assange, they felt that Trump might act selfishly and undermine the overall interests of American imperialism. And that is all that's going on here. And he largely did not. He did not. And I want to get to where we are at with the Trump administration right now, right? Because, look, I'm disgusted. We are in a shitty spot in American politics. We are in a pretty shitty spot in American politics. No way around it. We are in a really shitty spot. Something is going on behind the scenes in the Trump administration. I don't know what it is, but we're going to know soon. Things will be much clearer in September, according to what I'm hearing. September is when things are going to be more solidified. But Trump has been a shitty president. He was a shitty president in his first term. And so far, the first 7 months here have been worse than his first term. I could go over all the bad things that he's doing. Real quick, I'll just tell you some of the bad things Trump is doing. One, ICE is not following the law and are detaining people without charges, are going places without warrants, are acting above the law in their targeting of people and in their raids. One. Two, Trump has been deporting people for their political views and, deporting people for being pro-Palestine. Three, Trump bombed Iran over the stupid nuclear thing. He attacked Iran as a favor to Israel. 4, Trump said he was going to end the war in Ukraine in 24 hours. He hasn't done it yet. 5, Trump bombed Yemen. There's so many bad things Trump has done. Trump has been awful so far. And it sucks. It sucks. And on the one hand, I'm not really surprised. But on the other hand, it's really demoralizing. It's very, very demoralizing. Because on the campaign trail, Trump was talking a different way. And what I want you to understand, and this might be a hard pill for some people to swallow, and that's fine. I'm not trying to be popular. But it's still better that Trump won. It is still better that Trump won, even though he's been shitty. Why? Because Trump ran on a platform saying he was going to end the wars. Trump ran on a platform saying that he was going to protect free speech. Trump ran on a platform of appearing to be at odds with the deep state. He was shot in the ear and they tried to throw him in jail. And Trump won. And there was a popular mandate of opposition to the wars, to the police state, and to the American establishment. And Trump didn't deliver on any of that. But the American people went to the polls and said, I want the wars to stop. I want my free speech to be protected. And I don't approve of this establishment that's trying to throw Trump in jail. That is better by far, even though it didn't translate into any actions. That is better by far than if Kamala had won. If Kamala Harris had won, there would have been a mandate, a popular mandate for going to war with Russia and escalating in Ukraine. They would have been saying, see, one candidate said he just wanted to end the war, he didn't care which side won, and one candidate was going to stand with Ukraine until the end, and the public voted for her. So they would have a public mandate. There would be a public mandate for what happened to the Uhuru movement and throwing people in jail. There would be a public mandate for the huge crackdown on dissent and the jailing of all kinds of, Trump supporters after January 6th. There would be a popular mandate for Biden administration policies of jailing people for their political views. Now, Trump has continued doing that. He's been deporting people for their political views, etc. But there was a public mandate in opposition to that. If Kamala Harris had won, it would have sent the message that the American people approve of the war in Ukraine continuing. The American people approve of imprisoning people for their political views. The American people approve of trying to throw Trump in jail to keep him out of office. The American people approve of what was done to the Uhuru movement. The American people approve. It would have been a disaster if Kamala Harris had won the election. If Kamala Harris had won the election, it would have been the American people registering their approval of the way the country was going under Biden. And instead, we got the American people registering their disapproval of how the country was moving. That's good. That is good. Okay? And maybe Trump didn't do it, but obviously Kamala wasn't going to do it. It's still better that the American people voted for something good and didn't get it than it would be if they voted for something bad and got it in abundance. Right? If you know anything about the history of this country, the elections don't determine things, right? Woodrow Wilson ran on a platform. He kept us out of war and he won the election and then he got us into World War I. Lyndon Johnson ran on a platform of not escalating the Vietnam War. And as soon as he won the election and defeated Barry Goldwater, he escalated the Vietnam War. These things, this is how politics works in America. The problem is not one candidate. The problem is the establishment. However, in the 2016 election, one candidate was giving voice to what the American people in their millions feel, which is that their freedoms are being taken away, that the economy is getting worse, and that we're involved in all kinds of wars that don't benefit us. One candidate was giving voice to that opposition, and one candidate was defending the establishment. And the American people voted for the candidate who was giving voice to opposition to the establishment, and that candidate got into office, and the economy is still bad. And we're still involved in all these wars and we're still losing our freedom. But it's still better that the American people registered their vote against it. Okay? And if that's hard for you to understand, I apologize. But I don't think it's that hard to understand, right? I'm trying to think of analogies to give, but it's better that people voted for something good, even if they didn't get it, than it is for them to vote. Our two choices were Kamala or Trump. There was not a serious third-party contender in the election. And, that's just the reality. Now, I want to also talk a little bit about the Center for Political Innovation, right? Because there are some things we need to clear up. Okay? First of all, we did not campaign for Trump. All right? We did not. We do not endorse any candidate. We do not endorse any candidate, right? And we did not campaign for Trump. Some of us in the organization voted for Jill Stein. Some of us voted for Trump. Some of us may have voted for other parties. I doubt that we have any members who voted for Biden, but it's possible. For all I know, we did not endorse any candidate. We did not campaign for any candidate. During the election, we marched around the streets of New York City with a banner that said, "Only peace can make America great again." And we were out in front of Trump Tower with that banner. And we were out in front of the New York Public Library with that banner. And we were out in front of the Madison Square Garden at Trump's big rally with that banner. And what did that banner say? It said, "Only peace can make America great again." And it showed Trump and Kim shaking hands. It showed Trump making friendly gestures towards North Korea. We were boosting the best thing that Trump did during his first term in office, and we were boosting something that Trump said during his campaign. Only peace will make America great again. That's not campaigning for Trump. All right. So please do not misrepresent it. I did feel, and I still feel, that Trump, it's a good thing that Trump won the election, as awful as Trump has been. Right? I still feel that way. And I said it numerous times on this channel, and I have no apology for that. And I still feel that way. I still think we're better off with Trump winning, as bad as Trump has been. But please do not claim that we campaigned for Trump. We did not campaign for Trump. We campaigned for peace. We campaigned for peace in a way that was directed at Trump supporters. And we took that banner to Trump's inauguration, that very same banner at Trump's inauguration, after Trump had already won. And we had that banner on the streets of Chicago in May. So please, if someone tells you we campaigned for Trump, it says, this is infuriating to me. I try not to pay attention to this shit. The internet is completely rigged. There's one of these fake Wikipedias that says Caleb denounced communism and became a supporter of Donald Trump. And it's like, that is a huge distortion, right? And we have moved on to innovationism. We're no longer trying to be communists. And I did think that Trump was the lesser of two evils in the elections. The idea that I ripped up all my beliefs and I'm just a MAGA bro now, that's a lie. And I mean, our enemies lie, and we can expect nothing less from our enemies. But, I just want to get that clear. It is better that Trump won the election, even though Trump has been shitty. And number two, we did not campaign for Trump. So just wanted to get that out there. Also, I wanted to point to something that happened. It's not even really something good. I wish I could tell you this was something good that happened. This isn't something good that happened. This is something interesting that happened when Trump won and in Trump's presidency so far. All right, we all know 2 years ago when Biden was in office, the Houthis were blocking ships in the Mediterranean, and Biden bombed Yemen a whole bunch, killed a whole bunch of Yemenis, children, etc. And the Houthis said, "Bring it on, motherfuckers. We're not afraid." And Biden said, "Okay, whatever." And then what happened? Trump was in office. There was a ceasefire for Trump's first 30 days. And during that ceasefire, the Houthis stopped their picket line. They started letting ships go through. They said, "Okay, you're not bombing Gaza. We will let the ships go through." That's what they said for their, for that time. And then when Israel broke the ceasefire, the Houthis resumed their naval blockade. And so then what happened? The USA bombed Yemen again. And it was horrendous, and it was wrong, and it was murderous. Children died, and it was awful. The USA destroyed airports, and what the USA did to Yemen was absolutely abominable. And the USA then sent a battleship to the Red Sea. And the Houthis unloaded on that battleship. And U.S. soldiers died. U.S. naval personnel died. Okay? The U.S. government will not admit that that's what happened. They've said that there were, unexplained deaths in the Red Sea. The Houthis took some U.S. soldiers' lives because they said, "Look, we're defending the Palestinians. You want us to stop defending the Palestinians. You've come here to break our naval blockade." The Houthis killed some American soldiers, and that breaks my heart. I'm almost in tears telling you this. right? And I don't want this to be the case. And I'm glad the U.S. government hasn't acknowledged it, because that would, it's heartbreaking that any American would die for Israel, right? That any American, I don't know who these folks were, but some American sailors, who signed up because they wanted to keep us safe from another 9/11, who signed up to pay for college, who signed up, they died so that Israel could keep bombing Gaza. And that, I'm not happy about that at all. It breaks my heart and it makes me angry. It infuriates me that happened. And it should infuriate you. You should never cheer for the death of American servicemen, right? Do not. It should infuriate you that they would be sent to defend Israel's right to kill Palestinians, to protect ships that are doing business with a country that's engaging in genocide. That should infuriate you. You should be seething with rage about it. You shouldn't be cheering for it, right? We understand that the Houthis have a right to do what they're doing, and that they are right to implement their naval blockade. Yeah, it's illegal what the Houthis are doing. And you know what else is illegal? Murdering and genociding the Palestinians. And, and they are engaging in, a naval picket line. Picket line means do not cross. And it's heartbreaking that any American soldiers would die. It breaks my heart. I'm just sad that this happened. But after that happened, what happened? After the U.S. battleship was hit, and after the U.S. personnel were struck, J.D. Vance, the Vice President of the United States, started very defensively talking about Yemen. And he kept emphasizing, this is not going to be another Vietnam. It's not going to be another Vietnam. Very interesting choice of words. And then what happened? Trump pulled the U.S. battleship out of the Red Sea. And he said, I made a deal with the Houthis. They'll never attack any more American ships. And they said to Trump, Mr. President, what if they attack Israeli ships? He said, I'm fine with that. And Israel was furious. And now the Houthis are blocking ships, and the USA is not messing with them. As long as American ships can go through, they don't care. Any ship that's bound for Israel, the Houthis are blocking it. The Houthis are all over the Red Sea, and the USA isn't doing a thing about it. Now, what happened there? Please do not misinterpret this as me telling you that Trump is good, and this is me saying that Trump is good. It's not that. It's that Trump didn't want the PR. Trump didn't want the bad PR of sending Americans to die. And Trump knew that among the American armed forces, there's huge anti-war sentiment. He also knew that, if the USA were to really invade Yemen and go all in, the body count would be massive. He knew that if they continued their operations in the Red Sea, there were going to be more and more dead sailors. And Trump said, I don't want that on my record. I don't want the bad PR. I don't want to be looked at that way. And so Trump just, to save face, he said, they were scared. They called us up in fear. They didn't call him up in fear. The Houthis said, no, they called us. And that battleship pulled out of the Red Sea. And the Houthis now run the Red Sea. They don't touch American ships. They touch Israeli ships. They touch all kinds of other countries' ships. They're enforcing their blockade. And they're shooting missiles at Israel. Around the clock, they're shooting hypersonic missiles at Israel. And the USA isn't touching them. Now, what can we learn from this? Now, if you think this is me defending Trump, shut the fuck up, okay? I'm not defending Trump. I'm saying that Trump is selfish. And if Trump thinks it's going to make him look bad, and if Trump thinks, this isn't a winnable situation, he will lie and strategically retreat in ways that are to the benefit of the American people and the American servicemen who aren't being sent into harm's way, and to the people of Yemen. Trump retreated in the Red Sea. And that was great. And I don't think Kamala Harris would have done that. I think Kamala Harris would have kept going. And I think that that was a moment where Trump was acting selfish. Trump was acting selfishly. He just didn't want it on his record that he sent Americans to go die in Yemen, to die in the Red Sea. And so he just said, screw it. And that right there, it's not that Trump is good, but that is a little glimpse of the potential for maybe something good happening under Trump. I don't know. But that and the other thing, this whole thing about Yemen is not going to be another Vietnam. You know, I know an organization that distributed thousands and thousands and thousands of books all over this country comparing Yemen to Vietnam. And thousands of them were distributed in the Chicago area and a pro-Palestine protest. And that organization is the Center for Political Innovation. Right? We are the only people that are doing educational work about who the Houthis are, about their religion, about the history of Yemen. And we have distributed our informational booklet all over this country. Who are the Houthis and what are they fighting for? And it's a great book. And if you haven't watched it, go watch Comrade Noah. He gave a great talk about it at our recent convention. We distributed thousands of copies of that book. And that book, that Houthi book is the only one of its kind. It says that the American people and the Houthis have a common soul. And it says that the American people and the Houthis have a common enemy, which is imperialism and the big bankers. And that book is really, really important. And we want to get that book into as many people's hands as we possibly can, because that book will educate people. And that book is something that they're never going to hear from the woke Palestine activists. They're never going to hear it from the PSL. They're only going to hear it from the Center for Political Innovation. We need to get that book everywhere. I believe that book had an impact on the discourse. I really do, you know, and I wanted to mention that. The other thing I wanted to mention is that the Center for Political Innovation, if you read, Where is America Going, right? In the 4th chapter, I talk about the kind of role that our organization plays. And I talk about how we basically, first of all, we exist to carry out operations. And those operations that we carry out are twofold. We carry out what we call top operations and bottom operations. On the one hand, we seek to intervene when there are divisions within the ruling class, when there's a point of controversy in society. We seek to intervene as an effective force that can carry out operations. That's why there was division, should we go to war, etc. And we intervened. Only peace can make America great again. There was division about Kamala Harris. We intervened, distributing our book that went viral all about Kamala Harris. There was, interest in Yemen, etc. We intervened by distributing our book. Who are the Houthis and what are they fighting for? Right? We did that. But at the same time, we also engage in what are called bottom operations. And bottom operations are holding the group together and solidifying our ranks and learning our own beliefs and our own ideology and getting to know each other and building the effective networks so we can carry out top operations. You have to do both. If you don't engage in top operations, you're not relevant. And if you don't engage in bottom operations, you don't have the apparatus with which to be relevant. You have to build your own ranks and solidify your own ranks and your own networks. And then you have to then use your ranks and networks to carry out operations that make you relevant in the discourse. Top and bottom organizing, top operations and bottom operations. And right now, it doesn't look like we're able to carry out any top operations because we're in such a shitty spot in American politics. And that's fine. That's fine. We can just carry out bottom operations. We just had an amazing convention. The video of that convention is going to be continuing to come out for the next little bit. I'm trying to churn it out, as much as we can. And on top of that, we are doing all kinds of activities. We have to build our organization. If there's a situation where we're not able to intervene in American politics, where we're not able to carry out top operations, it's fine. We'll just carry out bottom operations. We'll hold our group together. We'll establish, cohesion within our own ranks. This country needs innovationism, and it needs it very, very badly. Only innovationism recognizes that human creativity and growth is good, and that we need a government of action that mobilizes and controls the economy in order to make sure that we cultivate and unleash that spirit. We are the only people putting that perspective forward. Communism has become synonymous with degrowth, with Malthusianism, with pessimism, and with opposition toward individual initiative and opposition towards economic growth, etc. Now, obviously, that's not what Marx stood for. All the communist governments in the world have built power plants and built strong countries, etc. However, the reality is that in the American mind, communism means making everyone equal and making everyone poor so they're equal. And most communist groups go along with that. And on top of that, even the minority of communists who don't promote degrowth, they are still striving to create the dictatorship of the proletariat. And the dictatorship of the proletariat is not a realistic goal in our time, because we don't live in the age of factory owners and factory workers. We don't. We live in the age where we're moving toward more and more and more of a gig economy. The Uber driver is not on the factory floor with the other Uber drivers struggling against Mr. Uber who owns Uber and demanding a wage and setting up a picket line outside of Uber. And that's not how it works. Uber drivers are competing with other Uber drivers. Uber drivers rarely see each other. Uber drivers think of themselves as small business owners. Uber drivers go out of their way to figure out when the best hours to work to make the most money are. Uber drivers often depend on their own individual initiative. They're competing with other Uber drivers. And that we have an economy where more and more workers are going to be gig workers like Uber drivers. And striving for trade union consciousness and dictatorship of the proletariat is not going to work as a serious organizing model. It's just not, right? I'm not against unions. It's good when workers get together and assert their needs on their employers. But the idea that the future of organizing against imperialism and monopoly corporations is going to be forming worker associations to demand a contract to get higher wages, it's not going to be that way, right? And so a movement that strives to establish the dictatorship of the proletariat is going to be more and more out of touch. It's going to be more and more out of touch. And it's going to become more and more LARPy and absurd. Okay? And, people may not want to recognize that, etc. But that's the reality of the situation. We're moving toward a gig economy. And because of that, we need to build a movement that calls for society as a whole to take control of the means of production and have a government that unleashes people to fulfill their great potential. We need to get people to understand that we have a government that is allowing corporations and monopolies to enrich themselves through destructive accumulation. We recognize that capitalism has entered a fourth stage. That capitalism, first you had primitive accumulation. That was the clearing of the commons. That was colonialism. That was, the theft, the mass theft that laid the basis for capitalism. Then you had the industrial period, where the factory owners and the titans of industry, the Carnegies and et cetera, and the steel, the Mellons, and the factory owners and industry, et cetera. And then after that came imperialism, capitalism in its monopolistic stage, which is when the bankers became dominant and when they started going around to the colonized world and holding back development and keeping countries in poverty and dumping their excess products on them and seizing them as captive markets, as client states. And we maintain that now capitalism has entered a fourth stage called destructive accumulation. And destructive accumulation is defined, first of all, by the fact that there is no more a labor aristocracy. They're no longer keeping a comfortable middle class in the homeland. Second of all, it is defined by the fact that the primary methods through which profit is being extracted by capitalists is by methods that destroy productive forces. Like, for example, the opioid epidemic. That's not increasing value in society. It's actually destroying value in society. Getting a whole bunch of people that would be productive workers to be heroin addicts, that decreases the productivity of society, but it makes a huge amount of profits for medical corporations. The prison industrial complex, again, does not increase the productivity of society. Taking a whole bunch of people that would be workers out in the economy, working in factories, and making them prison slave laborers, creating a prison slave labor underclass, that is not increasing the value in society, but it's a way that they're making profits. The military industrial complex, again, creating a bunch of bombs and tanks and weapons that you go and blow people up around the world, that's not increasing the productivity and the value of society. And that the primary way that capitalism continues to go is with decreasing value. And this is what Lynn Marcus and Arpalm Dutt and many others pointed out was the nature of fascism. And we have basically entered a period where fascist economics has become the norm, where capitalism keeps going with degrowth and destruction and destructive accumulation, right? That what used to be methods used by Nazi Germany or fascist governments to stabilize the economy has become the norm. They are no longer increasing value in society. They are extracting profit primarily through mechanisms that drive down the value creation in all of society. This is a new breakthrough, right? And again, Lynn Marcus talked about this. If you read this book, Dialectical Economics, that Lynn Marcus wrote in the 1970s, he talks about this a little bit. Arpalm Dutt talked about it in relation to Nazi Germany. But our organization is the only one that really understands that this is a new stage and that it's not imperialism as Lenin described it, because imperialism meant building up an aristocracy of labor at home. Now they are demolishing that. Imperialism meant producing huge amounts of commodities and then dumping them on captive markets in the developing world. Now they're not doing that, right? That imperialism has moved on. We are now in a new stage defined by destructive accumulation. And that is why the first world living standards are going down. And that is why we are, in a new ballpark. And in the period of destructive accumulation that we're in, that changes everything. And it changes a lot of things. First of all, it changes what our orientation toward our country is going to be, right? We have to be the ones saying that we want a stronger country, we want a more prosperous country, because the system, the imperialists, are making the country poorer. It used to be they beat down and destroyed countries around the world to make themselves wealthier. Now they're making these countries poorer. It changes our orientation towards the labor movement, because again, we're not in a period where, there's labor unions and factories going on strike. I mean, that's just not the period we're in. We're in a new period of capitalism, which is going to call for new tactics. And we're the only political organization that has this understanding. And because we have that understanding, we have an ideology to teach to people that is very unique. And we are able to intervene in the political process in a way that no other group can. And while we're waiting for things to open up, because things will open up, right? Elon Musk is going to start this new American party, in theory, which might be anti-war. The way things work, there is a duality in the universe, right? I think even if we're critical of the dialectical materialist philosophy, we understand that dualism is how things work, right? I mean, that's something most religions understand. You have God and Satan, right? You have dark and light, right? The unity of opposites, and that there is duality, and that there soon will be duality in the way things are going in America, and forces of opposition will emerge, and we will be able to intervene. There will be more disputes within the ruling class. There will be forces, in the larger power structure that are pushing for good things that we can intervene to support. But while we're waiting for that to happen, we need to solidify our organization. We need to solidify it on the basis of understanding that innovationism and our celebration of human creativity is key. And that if we continue to be communists and we continue to advocate the dictatorship of the proletariat, and if we continue to talk about factory owners and factory workers, and we continue to wave red flags, and and if we stay there, we're going to be rendering ourselves irrelevant. And we need to solidify our understanding of the period of destructive accumulation and our program of a government of action. And we need to continue to recruit people that would never go looking for this. Penny, one of our most active members in Minneapolis, she said to me, Caleb, if you guys had been talking about communism, I never in a million years would have given you the time of day. But now, she's one of our most active members. And there's numerous other people who have gotten involved that if we were just saying, oh, we're the communists, we're the Communist Party, look at our red flag, look at our hammer sickle, they never would have given us the time of day. And on top of that, there are all kinds of people that if you do say you're a communist party, if you do wave the red flag, if you do talk that way, they come around and they are goddamn worthless. Not all of them. Some of them are. But there are plenty of people that have this desire for an identity, desire to be a communist. They want to buy communist shoes. They want to wear a communist shirt. They want to read books about Stalin and say, that's what I am. And those people overwhelmingly are not helpful in building an organization or doing what we need to do in carrying out top and bottom operations. They're not helpful in even, facilitating and holding the group together. They're definitely not helpful in intervening in struggles in society and intervening in contradictions within society at large. They're just not helpful at all. They just want to say they're communists. Okay. And CPI exists to serve a purpose. This isn't internet entertainment, right? It's not internet entertainment. We exist to have a network of people who trust each other, can rely on each other, and can try to rescue America from globalism, imperialism, and can try to raise consciousness in this country against globalism, imperialism. That's why we exist. And, if we're going to exist, we have to define innovationism and our own ideology and what makes us important. And that's why reading What is Innovationism, the textbook, is important. That's why all that we do is so important, because if we were just defining ourselves as communists, we're left behind. Now, I also want to talk about this. I must say this, right? That, and I'm going to try to say this diplomatically, but it must be said. Okay. A communist group called the African People's Socialist Party was indicted by the U.S. federal government for being agents of Russia. And they were charged and they were dragged into federal court. And our organization did more to support them than any communist group did. And I'm not saying that to brag, honestly. I'm saying that as an indictment of the communist movement. A group of black communists, African internationalists, led by Chairman O'Malley, the FBI raided their homes 3 years ago, charged them with being foreign agents, tried to put them in jail for 15 years. And the Communist Party put a nice article on their website about it. And other groups tweeted about it. And overwhelmingly, the communist groups did nothing to support them. They completely left them out to dry. And I must tell this story. And I'm going to try to not get too fired up here because this makes me angry. But Center for Political Innovation, we did more to support them than any other organization. I raised their case at the United Nations at a UN press conference and got the spokesperson for the Secretary General to acknowledge the case and say he would look into it. Our member, John McCarthy, did endless work, raising their case with Julian Assange's relatives, doing outreach, promoting the case. We had rallies around the country, hands off Uhuru, and we had a press conference. I was the chair of the U.S. delegation to the World Youth Festival, and we had a press conference at the United Nations. The only reason we were supposed to have the press conference at the United Nations was because of the Uhuru case. It was because of the fact that they had indicted Chairman O'Malley, Penny Hess, Jesse Neville with being foreign agents because they went to a conference in Russia. And we feared that we would be retaliated against for going to a conference in Russia. So we had a press conference at the United Nations about that case. Except I am the only person, me and Noah, another member of our organization, we are the only people at that press conference who mentioned their case. The other communists who were given a platform at a press conference that was supposed to be about Uhuru did not mention Uhuru in their speeches. Okay? You can go and watch the press conference for yourself. Certain people, and you can go watch the video. I'm not going to, call out names on here. I mean, it's pretty obvious who I'm talking about. Certain people were given a platform at the United Nations that was supposed to be about Uhuru, and they said nothing about the Uhuru case. They just blathered about themselves at the press conference. Now, it's one thing that these communists didn't do anything to support the Uhuru movement. It's another thing that these communists claim to support Russia, but yet they weren't concerned that they were making it illegal to support Russia. But then on top of that, there was a press conference at the United Nations that was supposed to be about supporting Uhuru, and they blathered about themselves. And if it wasn't for me and Noah, they wouldn't have even mentioned Uhuru. Now, think about that. Think about that. And I'm at the point where it's like, maybe you hear this and you go, okay, Caleb, I understand what you're saying. They tried to make it illegal to stand in solidarity with Russia, and that's really dangerous. They targeted this black communist organization to make an example out of them, to set the precedent that it's illegal to support Russia. And I understand that that's a bad thing. So I understand why you would think it's important to raise their case, and I understand why you're outraged. You're outraged that these other communist groups didn't do anything for them. And if you're one of if you get that, thank you. And there are other people who just don't understand why that's a concern. It just doesn't occur to them why this is a big deal, right? That these communist groups that claim to support Russia, certain, I don't even want to call them communist groups, but certain fandoms claim to support Russia, claim to believe, just like Uhuru, that Russia is right in Ukraine, claim, and they did nothing to support the Uhuru movement. Nothing to support the Uhuru movement. Even when they were given a platform at the United Nations, they didn't support the Uhuru movement. At a press conference about the Uhuru movement, they still couldn't talk about the Uhuru movement. And if you can't understand why these people are completely worthless, then go fuck yourself. And I hate to be crude, but it's just like, you can lead a horse to water, but you can't make him drink. Okay? And these people, it never even occurred to them that they should stand in solidarity with Uhuru. Never occurred to them. It never occurred to them that at a press conference about Uhuru, they should support Uhuru. And it never occurred to them that the work CPI was doing to support Uhuru was important. None of that ever occurred to them. These people's head is so far up their own ass. And literally all these people care about is likes and shares and social media personalities. They're not a real communist party. They're a social media fandom. They claim to believe the same thing as the Uhuru movement. The federal government was trying to put the Uhuru movement in jail. They did nothing to support them. I arranged for them to have a platform to support them at the United Nations. They still did nothing to support them. And to this day, they don't understand why there's anything wrong with that. They've never said, I'm sorry for not supporting the Uhuru movement. They've never said, oh, it was a really good thing that Caleb did to support the Uhuru movement. They don't care. All they care about is themselves. They are just doing a social media grift. All they care about is how cool their people look on the internet. They do not give a shit about whether it's legal to organize in the United States, whether they can be thrown in jail. A lot of their leaders aren't even in the United States anymore. They've left the United States and they're doing their social media grift from another country. If you can't understand why CPI is important, and you think that this group has any value, you think that this social media grift has any value, go fuck yourself. You know, because it's like, I can lead a horse to water and I can't make you drink. If you think that a group that said that CPI supporting Uhuru was cringe, go fuck yourself, right? If you think that a group that can't even understand, that not only did they not support Uhuru, they don't understand why it was a good thing that we supported Uhuru. If you can't understand why that group is lower than garbage, and we're obviously much more important, despite whatever flaws on our part you perceive, I don't know what to tell you. You know, I mean, I feel like talking about this organization would be like sitting here, I'd be like reading you, the biography of Jack the Ripper, and then he murdered this person, and then he murdered this person, and then he, cut up this woman. And I'm reading it out to you. And then, you look at me and say, yeah, what's your point? Well, I mean, if this doesn't mean anything to you, I don't know what to tell you. This group literally threw Uhuru under the bus, thinks it's a bad thing that CPI supported Uhuru, went out of their way to not mention Uhuru at a United Nations press conference about Uhuru. And if it doesn't occur to you that this group is fucked up, and if you can't understand, I don't know what to say. And if this message doesn't get through to you, you're unreachable. And I'm not interested in reaching people who are unreachable. And there's plenty of people that are unreachable. Look, there's a lot of people who think Uhuru should have gone to jail because Russia bad. I mean, I'm not going to reach those people. And there's a lot of people who think that that Putin is worse than Hitler. I'm not going to reach those people. And if you think that this group that claims to believe what Uhuru believes and claims to be building an organization to promote anti-imperialism just like Uhuru, and saw Uhuru get indicted for doing that and didn't do jack shit to support them, and then attacked us for doing it and called it cringe, right? I don't know what to tell you. And it's like, if you're not convinced by this, why CPI should exist and why CPI matters and why these other groups don't, I mean, I'm not going to convince you. You can lead a horse to water and you can't make him drink. And I can tell you, I just laid out the facts before you. We saw that they were trying to make it illegal to be an anti-imperialist. We did everything we could. They saw they were trying to make it illegal to be an anti-imperialist, and they did jack shit. Maybe they tweeted once about it, and then they attacked us for doing something about it. And if that doesn't mean anything to you, if you still think that these people are better because they're calling themselves communists or they're cool on the internet or they got a bunch of likes and shares, I don't know what to tell you. I mean, again, it's like I'm reading you Jack the Ripper's biography to convince you Jack the Ripper is a bad guy. And you go, yeah, so what? I mean, well, what do you say at that point? I just read off a bunch of brutal murders of Jack the Ripper. And you go, so what's your point? Well, if that doesn't affect you, I don't know what does, right? And I don't want to get too upset and I don't want to get hyperbolic here. So I'm going to move on from this topic. I think I've made the point. But if you're watching this and you still think that this streamer club is better than CPI, go fuck yourself. Go fuck yourself, and I'm never going to convince you of anything, so I don't care what you think, right? And that needs to be our attitude. Look, there are some people who are just not going to get it. There are just some people that are just not going to get it. And, I mean, we have nothing to say to them, right? I mean, it's not my job to convince people that are unconvincible. It's not my job, if somebody's blind, it's not my job to convince them to like great paintings. If someone is deaf, it's not my job to convince them that Beethoven is a great composer. It's like, they say you shouldn't throw your pearls before swine. And, yeah, can we just move on already? Yeah, exactly. And I wanted to get that out of the way. CPI exists to carry out operations. And operations are very, very desperate. Very, very desperate right now. We need to carry out operations. We had a convention. We have an organization of people that are very solid. And we're getting good stuff done. And that's great. And I'm proud of what we're doing. And we have to hold the group together. And we're doing great stuff. We're going to publish a book of the convention. The convention proceedings will be in a book, which is going to be good. More video is being published. I wanted to just highlight another thing. This is another point I wanted to make. The pandemic, the lockdowns, right? Why did they happen? And this is an important point. Why did they do the lockdowns? They did the lockdowns because the economy was about to crash. It was about to be 2008 all over again. And the lockdowns were a financial crisis, but it was like a controlled demolition. The global economy was going to experience another huge crash. And rather than just let it crash naturally, they crashed it on their own terms. Right? And the pandemic was an economic crash. Oil went negative at the very beginning of the pandemic. I don't know if you remember this, but oil was, was negative. And all kinds of people lost their jobs, and they had to kind of put the economy on life support by expanding the benefits that people got paid and expanding unemployment. And it was bad. It was very, very, very bad. The pandemic was a controlled demolition ahead of the U.S. economy and the global economy naturally blowing up from a crisis of overproduction. That the same thing that was behind the 2008 financial crisis, which is that there's no more room at the assembly line. They are producing goods more efficiently than ever before, and the wages they are paying out in the process of production are less than ever before. They are producing products like never before, and our ability to buy them is lower than ever. That same problem that I keep hammering home, the problem of value crisis, overproduction, glut, the tendency of the falling rate of profit, the fact that they make it more and more efficient to produce goods, and in the process of doing that, they hire fewer and fewer people, and we never have the ability to buy back the products we create. This is the problem with capitalism. Capitalism creates poverty amid plenty, poverty created by abundance. I cannot hammer that home enough. And that is why the U.S. economy crashed in 2008. And that's why the U.S. economy was about to crash in 2020. And they had a controlled demolition. And they had a controlled demolition. And they won't be able to do that again. They won't be able to have another controlled demolition because everyone's pissed. We're pissed about the vaccine that didn't work. We're pissed about the fact that more people died from suicide and other problems related to the pandemic than actually died from COVID. We're pissed. They're not going to be able to do another lockdown. It's not going to happen. And so there's going to be another financial crisis. And once that happens, we have to have an apparatus in place. We have to have an organization that is capable of mobilizing the masses. And we have to have relationships within the ruling class and with it different factions and within the power structure that will allow us to exist. And I've talked about how revolutionary movements go through 3 phases. They go through the period that we're in now, strategic defensive, where you're just holding the group together, right? The ground isn't fertile. But then the game changes. And we enter what's called strategic equilibrium. And that's where the conditions of society are so bad and the divisions in the ruling class are so intense that a revolutionary organization can exist and can flourish. And we haven't had strategic equilibrium in the United States since the 1930s. And we are going to enter strategic equilibrium relatively soon. I worry about how soon it might be. I worry that we may not be ready for it when it happens. But economic crisis is on the horizon. And soon we're going to be in strategic equilibrium. The masses are going to be suffering so much, and the ruling elite are going to be fighting with each other so much that our organization is going to blossom and grow, and we are going to be very, very important because people are going to desperately need an organization like the Center for Political Innovation. We have to be ready for that to happen. And that requires top and bottom operations. We have to be ready in the terms that we have allies within the ruling class, allies within the power structure. And we have to be ready in terms of our organization. We have to have the people and the organizational infrastructure necessary to exist in those circumstances and really expand and swing into action and build the communities and, carry out the activities that are needed to make sure, that we set up shop and flourish among the masses. And it's not easy to be in a situation where you can do both of those things, but that's what's ultimately going to happen. Now, strategic equilibrium then leads to the phase of strategic defensive. And strategic defensive, that's when society becomes heavily polarized and the revolutionary organization dominates one side of the disagreement, and on that basis is able to go for power. Now, we're nowhere near strategic defensive, but strategic equilibrium may be happening soon. We all need to be thinking about strategic equilibrium. We all need to be thinking about it and how we can be positioned when strategic equilibrium arrives, right? How we can be prepared to do what needs to be done when strategic equilibrium approaches. And everything we do should be done with the understanding that strategic equilibrium is on the horizon and that we are preparing for strategic equilibrium. We're not caught up in the day-to-day. Right? The day-to-day stuff, it's worth paying attention to the here and there, but ultimately our focus is preparing for strategic equilibrium and making sure that strategic equilibrium, when that happens, we are ready to be the organization that will be needed. Organizations like us will be very needed in such a period. And so on that basis, we need to just continue to exist. Look to the Uhuru movement, what they've accomplished. They're a very important organization. That's why the U.S. government has targeted them. In a period of strategic equilibrium, there's a very good chance they could become almost the de facto government of the city of St. Petersburg, Florida, and the city of St. Louis, Missouri, or at least certain sections of it, right? I mean, they have the apparatus. They're providing the services. They have radio stations. They have farmers markets, In a period of strategic equilibrium, the masses would rally behind them and they would become the de facto leaders of two major cities and the United States. Well, we're nowhere near that as an organization, but we should figure out how we can position ourselves to be such an important group in certain regions that that when the time is right, we can step up and play an important role and rescue our country from a crisis. Ultimately, that's what we're going to be doing. We're going to be rescuing our country from a crisis. Conditions created by globalism and imperialism and the period of destructive accumulation will become so intense that organizations like ours will be a necessity. The masses will turn to us for leadership. They will need us. I tell people that revolutionaries are a lot like dentists, right? Most of us would like to avoid going to the dentist at all costs, but there's a very small minority of people who really like teeth. They study dentistry and they're fascinated by it. And the overwhelming majority of humanity doesn't like dentists, doesn't like teeth, would like to avoid thinking about the dentist and all of that. But then the moment arises where they get a cavity that hurts so bad, they've got no choice, but they've got to run to the dentist. We're the dentist. We're the dentist, basically. And the time is going to arise where the cavity will be so bad but the masses will run to us. And sometimes we feel quite alienated from the masses, because for us, teeth are awesome. Teeth are really interesting. We study teeth. You're watching me stream all night about all this teeth. Most people don't care about teeth. But no matter how much a person is not interested in teeth, if their mouth hurts, if they've got a cavity that hurts so bad, they run to the dentist. Strategic equilibrium is when they get the cavity that hurts so bad, they run to us. And that's coming. It's coming. It's coming. And everything we do as CPI should be focused on that understanding. That understanding. Strategic equilibrium is coming, and we need to be in the position to carry out the operations that need to be carried out when strategic equilibrium arises. And that is a hard thing to keep your mind on. We're thinking about something far in the future. I've made the analogy of Noah's flood, right? Do you think it was easy for Noah to build the ark when it didn't look like there was going to be a flood? But Noah knew that flood was coming, and he built the ark. And to a lot of people, it looked really stupid. Why are you building an ark? Why are you building an ark? Well, when the flood came, everyone saw, oh, that's why you were building an ark. And we need to understand with CPI, it's going to be kind of like that. People are going to look at us and say, why aren't you internet famous? Why aren't you commenting on this or that? Well, we're building an ark. And when the floodwaters come, people will see how important that ark is. And until then, people are going to be confused. I've also made the analogy that Lenin frequently made, and took it from Leo Tolstoy, about, a couple guys are walking through the countryside, and they see this guy up on a hill waving his arms, and they think the guy's crazy. He's having an epileptic fit. But then, as they got closer, they saw he wasn't crazy. He was just sharpening his knife. And that's what we're doing. We're doing things that might look crazy, that might look like they don't have any real purpose, but they do. And sometimes we run this way, we run that way. Sometimes we might appear like we're messing around, but we're not messing around. And I do want to say this, right? That every time we lose people in CPI, we get stronger. And that's something that's hard to understand, right? You'd think, Caleb, how are you getting stronger by losing people? Because we're shedding people that we're going to leave anyway, right? Those people who left, they left because they weren't up for the challenge. And every time we lose people, the people we get after that are even stronger and better. I mean, that's just, I've noticed that. It's weird, CPI, at one point we were very large, but we had a lot of very unhelpful people who were not helpful. And then we lost those people, and suddenly we were smaller, but we got way more done because all the jokers were gone. And then we lost some more people, and we did even more. And every time we lose people, we become more potent. How does that make any sense? It makes perfect sense. It actually makes perfect sense. And this is actually what Lenin was talking about. He said the party strengthens itself by splitting. That's the truth. Every time we lose people, we become stronger. The people that we have are so much more effective. Every time we lose people, the people we have get stronger. And we're in a position to grow even more. And it's a very strange dialectic. You'd think you grow an organization by growing. Well, we actually get stronger by splitting. That's a good sign. That's a very, very good sign. Leftist groups, over the last few decades, they've been getting weaker and weaker by losing people. We've been getting stronger by losing people because we test people. And if you become active in the Center for Political Innovation, you will be tested. There's no way around it. You're going to be tested. And some people join, on the website, and that's fine. We need more people to join on the website. Please go join on the website if you haven't done so. We need the dues money. And some people become active members. If you come to a Saturday membership meeting, we will then add you to the active members thing. And some people get involved in building a local and doing outreach. And some people start to play a national role in the organization. And we have, you can be just somebody who pays dues in CPI, or you can be somebody who's helping run the national convention, right? We allow people to do all kinds of things. There are people that only do online tech work. There are people that are heavily involved in in real life stuff. We allow people to participate in many, many different ways. But regardless of how you participate, you will be tested. You will be tested. And we got some great folks. And that's what I learned at the 7-day program in July. Early July, I learned we have some great people. And we were tested in July. There were moments where we were tested. And one thing that I learned from the 7-day workshop is that next year, it's going to be way easier because there are people I did not know who were reliable, who are very reliable, right? I have learned that you can only assign things to people that you can rely on, right? If you ask somebody to do something and they don't do it, that's a problem, right? And it doesn't get done. Well, now, thanks to the 7-day workshop, I've learned that there are more reliable people. People have been tested. And so now I can assign responsibility more broadly. There'll be less on me and Noah and other people like that. And we can get more done. And so I'm very excited. And I feel very, very good. CPI is in a really, really good spot. We're in a really, really good spot. And, I will say, I don't want to get into too much detail, but, I streamed about Isabel dos Santos last night. And, we published the article. I heard from people from the African continent this morning. I woke up and I'm not going to tell you who or what, but, I'm in touch with certain people on the African continent who were inspired by what CPI did. And we're making a difference, right? I'm in touch with other people in other parts of the world who see what we're doing and are very inspired by it. And our books, are selling like crazy. And we're killing it, folks. We're killing it. And we're killing it in ways that I think are quite obvious if you're paying attention. But if you're not paying attention, you wouldn't notice. And that's kind of good. We don't want our detractors to notice. So I am proud of everything that we're doing. We're in a messy, messy, ugly spot in politics right now. No way around it. But we keep our eye on the prize. We intervene when we can, and we solidify our own ranks. And that is where we are as an organization. So that's my opening remarks for tonight. It took me 2 hours to say it all because I've been sitting on it. I've been holding off saying it, but that's okay. So why don't we do the roll call? And then after that, I'll answer any questions that people might have. So names and locations. I will call you all out as I see you. Names and locations. Who is with us tonight? Names and locations. Who is with us? 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 Names and locations. Alex in Brazil. Kew Gardens. Rice from Adelaide, Australia. Lawrence Johnson in Chicago. Y'all know me. Penny in Minnesota. Jenny in Cincinnati. Denver in Minnesota. Good guy. Luca in Singapore. JDL in the Ozarks. Jacob in Wisconsin. Connor in Vancouver, Canada. Good to have you with us. Names and locations. Gabby in Chicago. Welcome. Names and locations. Who is with us? Names and locations. Who is with us? Names and locations. Who is with us? Anybody else? Amway in India. Good to have you with us. Moonlight Beach, California, Scott S. Diana in Orlando. Good to see you, Diana. Good to have people holding the fort in Florida. Jokers 4. All right. Anybody else? Names and locations. I see we've got a few Rumble rants that have already come in. Names and locations. Names and locations. Anybody else? Going once, going twice. Names and locations. All right. Well, the way you can send questions, there are two ways to do it. You can send Rumble rants. You can send Rumble rants on the Rumble, or you can send Cash App, Caleb Moppin 22. So in the spirit of what I just talked about for the last 2 hours, I have actually really enjoyed this song from the Communist Party of Canada Marxist-Leninist, because it's about, it's about basically what I just talked about holding an organization together and carrying out operations in their own weird Communist Party of Canada way. And the chorus kind of speaks to me. The chorus is, "So we've won another battle, let the enemy fall, but don't it seem paltry and don't it seem small? Though the enemy besets us and blocks our advance, the times cry out, here's the rose, now dance." So I actually kind of like the chorus. It's got kind of intensely communist lyrics that I kind of laugh at with my tongue in my cheek. But that line, "Here's the rose, now dance," that actually comes from Marx, and I will read you the passage. I will read you the passage from Marx that comes from. That's from the 18th Brumaire of Louis Bonaparte. I'll read it to you. I will read you the passage. "Bourgeois revolutions like those of the 18th century storm more swiftly from success to success. Their dramatic effects outdo each other. Men and things seem set in their sparkling diamonds. Ecstasy is the order of the day. But they are short-lived, and soon they have reached their zenith. A long cat's whinge takes hold of society before it can learn to assimilate the results of its storm and distress period soberly. On the other hand, proletarian revolutions, like those of the 19th century, constantly criticize themselves, constantly interrupt themselves in their own course, return to the apparently accomplished in order to begin anew. They deride with cruel thoroughness the half measures, weaknesses, and paltriness of their first attempts, and they seem to throw down their opponents only so the latter may draw new strength from the earth and rise before them again more gigantic than ever, recoil constantly from the indefinite colossalness of their own goals, until a situation is created which makes all turning back impossible, and the conditions themselves call out, here's the rose, now dance." So here we go.
Comrades, our history will tell of the glorious struggle to build CPCNL. Oh, it is the story of how our class continues to fight battle after battle to smash the old and build the new. And we won another battle, see the enemy fall. But don't it seem paltry and don't it seem small? Still the enemy besets us and blocks our advance. But the times cry out, here's the rose, now dance. In the early 60s, against increasing exploitation, the people rose up to change the situation. Despite revisionist betrayal of this massive upsurge, a new quality in small quantity from the movement emerged. And we won another battle, see the enemy fall. But don't it seem paltry and don't it seem small? Still the enemy besets us and blocks our advance. But the times cry out, here's the rose, now dance. They said don't turn off the people by making a scene, or you isolate the left from the mainstream. But we boldly shouted, down with imperialism, down with the lackeys, down with revisionism. And we won another battle, see the enemy fall. But don't it seem paltry and don't it seem small? Still the enemy besets us and blocks our advance. But the times cry out, here's the rose, now dance. There were still lots of questions, but we never shied, for we had Marxism, Leninism, an invincible guide. The trend of unity of Marxist-Leninists irresistibly spread, and defending Marxism, we marched ahead. And we won another battle, see the enemy fall. But But don't it seem paltry and don't it seem small? Still the enemy besets us and blocks our advance. But the times cry out, here's the rose now dance. Marxists and petty bourgeois clans, they all did their best to upset our plans. But they could not stop us, nor could the state attacks, nor the jailing of comrades who dared to fight back. Then we won another battle, see the enemy fall. But don't it seem paltry and don't it seem small? Still the enemy besets us and blocks our advance. But the times cry out, here's the rose now dance. Driven into a frenzy, the states and agent provocateurs into our ranks, thinking to stop us for sure. But their hope for easy victory was just a pipe dream, as we smashed the opportunists and exposed their schemes. And we won another battle, see the enemy fall. But don't it seem paltry and don't it seem small? Still the enemy besets us and blocks our advance. But the times cry out, here's the rose now dance. The so-called Marxist-Leninist demand a dogma that's pure, but all they could show us was a gross caricature. Safeguard our independence, the opportunists did say, but the working class sent it back, make the rich pay. And we won another battle, see the enemy fall. But don't it seem paltry and don't it seem small? Still the enemy besets us and blocks our advance. But the times cry out, here's the rose now dance. They unfurled their yellow banner called Mao Zedong thought, and gleefully shouted that we had been caught. Whenever loyal to Marxism we stood our ground, but the venom of our party brought Mao Zedong thought down. And we won another battle, see the enemy fall. But don't it seem paltry and don't it seem small? Still the enemy besets us and blocks our advance. But the times cry out, here's the rose now dance. The road has been long, but learn from our class. The proletarian revolution is a practical task. Here is our banner and here is our task. Defend the Marxist-Leninist party as the vanguard of the class. And we won another battle, see the enemy fall. But don't it seem paltry and don't it seem small? Still the enemy besets us and blocks our advance. But the times cry out, here's the rose now dance.
All righty. Thanks, everybody. I'm glad you're here. And so now I'm going to start answering people's questions. Yeah, so we don't have any super chats, cash apps that have come in. We do have the Rumble rants. If you got a question, send it via Rumble rant or cash app me at CalebMoppin22. So the first question is, Left is Best says, in your intro, Fred Hampton says racism is a byproduct of capitalism. What did he mean? Well, Fred Hampton was a member of the Black Panther Party, which maintained that Black people were an oppressed nation within U.S. borders. And this is the Leninist understanding of the national question. The idea is that nations are oppressed. It's not simply a matter of the workers versus the bosses. There are oppressed nations, right? And that, that the imperialists, the big monopolies in Western countries, they make super profits. They don't just make profits. And that workers from oppressed nations, like countries in Africa or Asia or Latin America, they aren't just exploited, they're super exploited. And that the Communist International applied that to nations within the Western countries, right? And the understanding was that the Black people, even though they're within the United States, because they've been subjected to Jim Crow, because they live in isolated communities, they have, their own, dialect, because they have their own religious groups, they have their own regions that they live in. They are a colonized nation within U.S. borders. And that understanding is why the Black Panthers were a Black-only organization, and they eventually wanted to create an independent Black socialist territory, right? That was eventually their goal, right? And that's the Republic of New Africa. The Communist Party wanted that in the 1930s. They called it the Black Soviet Republic. And it gets a little bit tricky because, it's one thing if a group of Black people are saying we want to have a separate territory where we're paid reparations and we control our own territory. It's another thing if a group of white people goes around advocating that. It comes across like segregation. So I would never tell the Black community that they have to separate. However, if the Black community did overwhelmingly want to form a separate Black nation and they wanted that, I would support their right to have it. And the same for, the Chicano people. If the people of the parts of the USA that used to be part of Mexico wanted to break away and have their own territory, if the indigenous people wanted to break away, I'm for that. But I can't go around advocating that when the people themselves are not, right? The majority of Black people at this point don't want a separate territory for Black people. They want to be integrated fully into U.S. society, and they demand their right to do that. And so I will support their right to do that. I will support an end to discrimination. I will support, allowing Black people to be part of U.S. society. However, there is a very strong Black nationalist current. And if that Black nationalist current wanted to choose separation, I would actively support their right to choose separation as their own decision. And that's the Leninist understanding of the national question, right? And it gets a little bit tricky, but the Black Panthers were a group of Black people who did, want a separate Black national territory. That was, that was what they asked for. So I would support their right on that basis. All right. Next question. I don't think I can answer the next question. I've already talked way too much about that stuff, and I just can't, I just can't talk about that any further. Left is best X. Dictatorship of the proletariat is absolutely necessary. While capitalist-funded covert agencies still exist, as long as socialist countries exist today, the weak ones have to be overthrown. Okay, well, what do you mean by that? Okay, so the word dictatorship of the proletariat, it's a phrase that Marx used, and it referred to the creation of a government that served the working class. The idea is we live under the dictatorship of the bourgeoisie, right? If you tell someone what to write, you're dictating to them, right? So under our system, those who have the money dictate. And the idea is that, the industrial worker, the wage worker, will create a state that dictates toward them. And my disagreement is not that we need a new state, right? I mean, I understand that the process of building an anti-imperialist working class government in America, a government of action that fights for working families, will mean new policing agencies and, et cetera. My objection is the wage worker focus, right? Is because right now the wage workers don't see themselves as wage workers. They see themselves and are increasingly becoming more of a like mini small business owner, and that the demand needs to be for a pro-growth government that will rejuvenate the entire country, rather than a government that represents the wage worker. My disagreement is not that eventually in the process of building a new society free from imperialism that we will have a new state. I totally agree with that. The state apparatus needs to be reborn in the process of reinventing this country to not be imperialist. I mean, you're right in what you wrote about the fact that we have a state that serves the big monopolies and the imperialists, the intelligence agencies, et cetera, and that it's not just a matter of taking hold of the ready-made state machinery. It's a matter of creating a new state apparatus. That I agree with. Where I disagree is the fixation on the wage worker. I think that's kind of an outdated Marxist thing, and that we are very much, in Socialism, Utopian, and Scientific by Frederick Engels, he said that the struggle is to, the proletariat takes power on behalf of all society and in the interests of all society. And I think we're basically fighting for a government that's for everybody. It's for the overwhelming majority of humanity. That's what we're fighting for, and that framing things as a struggle of the wage worker against the employer is just not where things are at currently. And that I believe there will be many employers that are going to be part of the anti-monopoly government that emerges. There are many anti-imperialist employers, many anti-imperialist corporations that make profits. We're not against capitalism or against imperialism. right? And that the socialist society we would like to create has a lot of market entities within it, right? We have to get away. We have to, really understand this is a struggle against imperialism and big monopolies and degrowth. It's not a struggle against employers, right? And that the employer versus employee thing has been taken in a really toxic direction. And it's just not where things are at in the age of the gig economy. We are not trying to incite employees against their employers. We're fighting for a government that invests in people and organizes the banks, factories, and industries to serve public good and to enable society to become very wealthy. We want a government that controls the economy on behalf of all society and kicks the ass of the big monopolies. We don't want to incite employers against their employees against their employers, right? And I guess that's where our difference is. Okay. I hope that helped clarify things. Okay. All right. Okay. Penny says in April, Burkina Faso grew by 4.9%. Woo! Go Ibrahim Traore. Wow. 4.9% growth rate. That is very, very, very good, right? This guy, Ibrahim Traore, this is an awesome, awesome African leader. Good for him. Wow. And can the USA real industrialize? No. The main jobs killer, Penny, is not offshoring. The main jobs killer is technology. We want to build a society that unleashes human creativity and innovation. And that'll be a new kind of industrialization, but it's not a matter of opening up the old factories, right? And I think when people talk about reindustrialization, that's what they mean, opening up the old factories. That's not where things are at. All right, everybody. I hope you enjoyed tonight's stream. I'll be back tomorrow night. And we're just going to keep getting in the habit of doing this every night. Dare to struggle, dare to win. And all right. All right, folks. Yeah, I'm just going to put on the closing music. Yeah, if you want to help me offset the cost of the convention, you want to send us a donation or you want to cash at me, that would be appreciated. Still a lot of people need to be paid back, etc. But we got this figured out. We got this. Talk to y'all soon.
New upsurge in the struggle against U.S. imperialism is now emerging throughout the world. Ever since World War II, U.S. imperialism and its followers have been continuously launching wars of aggression. But the people of various countries have been continuously waging revolutionary wars to defeat their aggression. And while the danger of a new world war still exists, and the people of all countries must get prepared, revolution is the main trend in the world today.